Hello and welcome to Projector, and on this episode, Eli Roth is soft-serving up something sinister in his latest film, Ice Cream Man. In the small town of Baleen Bay, the ice cream man, played by R.E. Millen, has come to serve up his sweet treats for the kids, but he's got some pretty strange flavours. His ice cream soon turns the town's children into homicidal maniacs who slaughter their parents, and a group of kids who didn't eat the ice cream, Charlie Zeltzer's Jared and his sister Lizzie, played by Sarah Abbott, Charlotte O'Reilly's Tommy, and Kiara Mirza Waldman's Mia, must try and stop the ice cream man's chaos. In recent years, Eli Roth has been mixing more traditional horror fare like The Green Inferno and Thanksgiving with more work-for-hire gigs like The House with a Clock in Its Walls, which I actually quite liked, and the universally panned adaptation of the game Borderlands, which limped onto screen several years after principal photography with extensive reshoots. The latter experience seems to have understandably put off Roth from doing big-budget studio films, and he decided to get back to his roots by creating his own indie outfit called The Horror Section, to finance and distribute low-budget genre films unrated. No notes, no compromises, just doing the films he wants to make. It's already released a few titles like Jimmy and Stiggs and Dream Eater, but Ice Cream Man is the first one that Roth himself has directed, and its first major release because of that. Just to be clear, by the way, this is not a remake of the Clint Howard cult favourite of the same name, nor is it based on the graphic novel. It's instead an original concept, one that Roth apparently first came up with 20 years ago, and the idea of having an ice cream man have children kill. That's quite a depressing thought though. Imagine you've had this idea in your back pocket for 2 decades, and this is the end result. Because you see, the ice cream man splatters the screen with something far more offensive than blood and gore, namely AI slop. Yep, that's right, this movie is absolutely filled with generative AI from start to finish. Much of the film's visual effects are provided by a company called Dark Half, which is an AI-based VFX company. If you visit their website, and I encourage that you don't, they state that AI doesn't make films, filmmakers do, which is a sentiment that I agree with, but in the totally opposite way in which they mean it. And I don't think I've made it a secret in the past that I'm not really a huge fan of Eli Roth's work, like when I reviewed Knock Knock. He's made a name for himself as a provocateur, and I find most of his movies to be obnoxious and unpleasant. Now, I saw Ice Cream Man at a mystery screening, so I didn't pick to see an Eli Roth film on purpose, as I don't rate him very highly as a filmmaker, but apparently my opinion of him was still too high. This certainly isn't the first film to use generative AI effects to come out recently. In fact, it's become alarmingly prominent in streaming creature features like Coyotes, Chum, and A Breed Apart, to name and shame a few. But it's arguably one of the most prominent today, coming from a named director and actually playing in cinemas. And I can't think of something that really undermines the whole independent spirit of this new label by using a hugely unethical, widely despised piece of technology that threatens to put people out of work, like say visual effects artists and animators in the case of this movie. A studio note didn't tell you to use AI, you chose to do that, Eli. And those effect shots have the unmistakable soft warpy quality to them that you associate with AI video, from a bunch of kids jumping off a climbing frame to the fire effects, which look as ugly as you would imagine up on the big screen. By far the most obvious are the animated sequences that you keep seeing through the film, because the Ice Cream Man has this kind of Pied Piper thing with old-timey cartoons, and the possessed children see these cartoons in their heads, encouraging them to act out these behaviours in violent reality. Leaving aside this makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. What do old-timey retro cartoons have to do with an ice cream man? And why does it appear on someone's phone at one point? These AI tunes pop up a number of times, often as thought bubbles in the kids' heads. And Roth, who previously worked as an animator, claimed he drew these cartoons and then sent them to some animators to make them more fluid. It was only when people saw the film and noticed they were very obvious AI animations did Roth concede that he misspoke, and the tech was used in, quote, a very small portion of a few scenes. Let's just say that his interpretation of small and few are very different from mine. But it doesn't stop there. In several instances, there are completely AI-generated shots. In the first few minutes, there's a scene where the kids are playing baseball and one of them has to run across the field, except for whatever reason, they didn't film a shot of him actually running, so instead it cuts to this jarring extreme close-up of some AI legs running across the frame. Later on in the sequence where we're being told the ice cream man's backstory, some of the cutaway shots are also fully AI, like the shot of someone digging up a grave. Hilariously, that's then followed up by a shot of what's supposed to be someone burying themselves into the ground, but AI can't interpret that kind of prompt, so the best it spat out was a shot of a hand rising out of the ground, but playing in reverse like this. It's actually quite embarrassing, because at best, it implies that Roth is grossly incompetent and didn't film enough basic coverage of a scene, and then in editing had to use AI to create a new shot that he could have and should have filmed on the day to fill the gap. At worst, he decided that instead of picking up a camera and properly filming some key insert shots in the crucial backstory of the title character, he'd just get AI to do it out of staggering laziness. Either way, it's a new low, even for Roth. It broadcasts that Roth doesn't care. He doesn't care about the actual cost of what he's using, he doesn't care about how his film looks, and he doesn't care about his audience watching at the end of it. Because the results look worse than a dropped ice cream cone on the ground in the midday sun. They look ugly and extremely cheap, and admittedly Ice Cream Man is not a big budget movie, it only cost $6 million to make, but that's still roughly 6 times the budget of Obsession, which looks 100 times better than this film does. So I will fully admit this isn't so much a review as it is a public service announcement. If you are concerned about AI, and I think the vast majority of people are these days, and you don't want to see it being used in your entertainment, you will likely want to avoid Ice Cream Man on a matter of principle. AI is all over this movie like cinematic chickenpox, and you should treat it as such. But even if we put the AI use to one side, and we really shouldn't, this movie is still awful in a multitude of more conventional ways. In the first 20 minutes or so, before things really kick off, it does seem like Roth is trying to do something. He sets up a bit of a plot and some characters, there's a bit of a campy atmosphere, and maybe a commentary on parents being overprotective of their children in there. But when the kids go bad, you can pretty much forget all semblance of a plot. Any of the supporting kids who got a tiny bit of setup are now just brainwashed automatons, and for long stretches of the movie, Roth just devotes himself to a succession of kill scenes, one after the other. Here's a random character, they're dead. Here's another random character, they're also dead. And those scenes are often very poorly staged to the point where they don't make sense. Why does someone watching their child dismembering her husband in the garage, holding a knife out in fear, walk towards them inexplicably? Oh, never mind, she awkwardly slipped on the ground, now she's dead. There's another scene where a dad is tricked into putting his hand into a garbage disposal, and for some reason the switch is on the opposite side of the room to the sink. In the worst example of this, not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, but 5 separate characters get killed in the same spot outside the school. They all keep wandering into this group of kids like lemmings and not immediately noticing the rising amount of dead people outside. The last one is especially inexplicable as a firefighter suddenly appears, spots some children up on the roof and tries to rescue them with a ladder, somehow not noticing the other corpses on the ground. It's the sort of thing that only makes sense when you realise that this centrepiece sequence was all shot in just a single day, according to a puff piece IndieWire article that compares it to Saving Private Ryan. Yeah, that's a bigger laugh than anything in the movie. And most of the film is like this, just people running from kids killing people into another scene of kids killing people. It loses any kind of shock value very quickly and just grows repetitive like an overstretched short film. The acting is also appalling, with the cast playing the adults being stiff even before they become cadavers. Although, in fairness, a part of that is because of the script, because no one behaves believably. You have all these kids showing up with melted ice cream around their mouths and on their clothes, and they're not speaking, and no one seems to question that, apart from the teachers in the school going, it's probably a TikTok trend. It's not oblivious enough to be amusing, it just comes across as badly written. And for a horror comedy, it isn't much of either. Weapons shows how much tension and suspense you can get out of sinister kids, but this is like that if you ripped out any of the smarts. The deaths themselves aren't inventively cartoonish or absurd enough to be funny, with the exception of one gag where they cut open a teacher's head and then scoop out his brain like ice cream, and they need way more OTT bits like that. Most of it is just people getting hacked up and so on, and more just gory, with lots of loving close-ups of innards or people's faces being crushed into pomegranate, and at least those are fairly decent practical effects. It's clearly Roth looking at the likes of the Terrifier films and going, I can do that! Well, apparently he can't. He even has a mute central villain just like those movies, but Ari Millen's title character is nowhere near as distinctive or as memorable as Art the Clown. He's barely even in the movie most of the time, occasionally popping up in his truck or wandering around with a box, and there's little sense of maniacal glee or menace to him, and his backstory is like Freddy Krueger if it made absolutely no sense. Roth is trying to play with this idea of adults taking advantage of children, but he wraps it in this convoluted flashback of abuse in the church that the ice cream man was wrongly framed for. If Roth actually understood what he was writing, he'd know he was creating a weirdly sympathetic origin, especially with the idea that the ice cream man was a scapegoat for predators because he was a foreign outsider, with someone crassly saying his accent meant he came from some, quote, war-torn country or something. Yes, really. But Roth isn't making this a coherent theme or commentary, as we're not supposed to side with the ice cream man, but it also makes every other character in the film unsympathetic, where even the kids are racing to save their parents who were directly involved in a wrongful conviction, as were most of the community. So who are we meant to care about in any of this? And it also doesn't explain why none of the adults recognise this extremely distinctive ice cream man if this all happened in recent memory. Not even the smarmy defence lawyer that Roth plays, who's making dad jokes like, ooh, that's chilling. But that kind of wanton mean-spiritedness is par for the course for an Eli Roth film who has never abandoned his frat boy sense of humour and relies on shock value that's more cruel and unpleasant. A few years ago, when I reviewed House with a Clock, I thought Roth might actually be growing up a little, but Ice Cream Man shows him regressing in every sense. It's riddled with try-hard edginess that would be offensive if they weren't so eye-rolling, from having the child actors constantly saying fuck to jokes about autism where someone drops the R slur. The reason why Mia didn't eat the ice cream is because she has an eating disorder, which Roth makes into a tasteless running joke and a plot point with lines like, I'm a 12-year-old, I know how to throw up. Ooh, aren't we an edgy boy, Eli? It may be 2026, but in his mind it's still 2006, and his approach to horror feels well out of date. And then there's the moments where Roth's bad taste tips into the wrong kind of creepy, especially with older sister Lizzie, a high school junior who the movie treats with a leering objectification. In the early dinner table scene, her younger brother jokes that she should make an OnlyFans account, and then her father, who I remind you is played by Roth himself, jokes that he wants to accompany her to a water park with her friends. Yeah, but what really cements the ickiness is a truly bizarre sequence where, for some reason, because she only took one bite of the ice cream earlier, her arms are paralysed and she has to somehow make her way from the bed to the bathroom. And credit to Sarah Abbott for throwing herself into the purported physical comedy of this scene, but this feels like an extremely contrived excuse to get her to flex her body to the camera while writhing around on the floor, culminating in a very suggestive shot of the toothbrush in her mouth. It's all very gross and uncomfortable. Yikes. Ice Cream Man is atrocious. Everything about the movie feels tired, rushed and lazy. It's very sloppily made and might be the worst film Eli Roth has ever made. In a year of top quality horror films, it just simply isn't good enough and feels like a grim reminder of just how bad the genre was back when Roth was at his peak, and he hasn't grown all that much from Cabin Fever. I can't even claim shock value on its side when I had a far more visceral response to Evil Dead Burn. It's just a lot of underdeveloped unpleasantness, capped off by an abrupt twist ending that ends what is clearly a comedy on a really bleak and bitter note. I'd say it might be alright for the most undemanding gorehound because of its near constant death scenes, but the sheer amount of generative AI all over the place is so egregious and so unforgivable that I can't recommend this to anyone. It really is the cherry on the shit sundae of slop. Easily one of the year's worst films, and it doesn't even reach so bad it's good. Just avoid it. If you like this review and you want to support a creator who doesn't use AI slop in his work, you can give me a tip on my Ko-fi page, or with YouTube's Super Thanks feature, which is right below the video. Or if you're really cool, you can go to my Patreon, where you can see my videos early among other perks, including access to my Discord server, and you can also join YouTube memberships for similar perks. Or you can just simply like, share, and hype the video. It all helps. Until next time, I'm Matthew Buck, fading out.